Working women are a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's time to release the girl power in all its forms. Article highlights, to this day, women's rights in the U.S. Constitution aren't explicitly guaranteed. If women's participation in the economy is equal to that of men, we can potentially add $28 trillion to the global GDP by the year 2025. Norway requires women to make up 40% of the publicly listed boards or risk dissolution. The hashtag Black Lives Matter hashtag was used 1.3 million times on Twitter, which was 500,000 more than the hashtag MeToo and Trump's hashtag MAGA hashtags on this particular Women's Day. I have every reason to be thankful for the positive influence the women in my life have had on me. It will be remiss of me if I don't acknowledge the simple fact that my mother, sister, wife, female family members, female friends are responsible for the best of who I am as a man today. They have taught me compassion and joy. They have taught me the quiet strength amidst challenges and much more. While this is true for me personally, I believe it's true for all men. I want you to journey with me through this video as we delve into the value of the girl child and what hurdles are in her way as she heads towards realizing her fullest God-given potential. In 2013, George Zimmerman was acquitted of murder in the death of Trayvon Martin. Many were shocked by this verdict, but little did we know this was going to start a movement that would have a huge impact on the political and social space in the U.S. Later, Chicago's Anita Alvarez failed to charge police officers who shot and killed at least 68 people. The Black Lives Matter movement helped to ensure Anita wasn't re-elected for the Cook County prosecutor position. In Florida, Angela Corey, the state attorney, failed to convict Trayvon Martin's killer and instead prosecuted Marissa Alexander, a black woman who didn't hurt anyone when firing a warning shot at her abusive ex-husband. Black Lives Matter was the first U.S. movement that leveraged the internet as a mass mobilization device. It was on this success that the hashtag MeToo and many other movements were built upon. Black Lives Matter movement influenced the Democrats to restructure their national platform to include issues such as criminal justice and reform. This movement was shown to have led to the election black leftist organizers to public office, such as activist Chokwe Lumumba to mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. From July 2013 through May 1, 2018, the Black Lives Matter hashtag had been used nearly 30 million times on Twitter, an average of 17,002 times per day, according to a Pew Research Center analysis of public tweets using Crimson Hexagon software. Pew Research compared hashtags between January 1, 2013 and May 1, 2018. The hashtag Black Lives Matter hashtag was used 1.3 million times on Twitter, which was 500,000 more than the hashtag MeToo and Trump's hashtag MAGA hashtags. Now, did you know that this huge movement was started by three young ladies, all under the ages of 35 years of age: Patrice Khan Cullors, Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi? Patrice Cullors, co-founder of Black Lives Matter, arrested in 2020 alone. Almost 41% of the entire continent of Africa will be holding major elections. It's with this background I want us to focus on the role of women in the economic development agenda. Women are about 50% of the total planet's population. In some countries such as Ukraine, El Salvador, Portugal, Hong Kong and Russia, there are more women than men. But this population ratio isn't reflected in politics, boardrooms, science and technology. Why is this the case? What is the advantage of balancing this equation? Legislative limitation. It took more than 140 years after America's independence to allow women to vote via the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Prior to this, married women couldn't own property and had no legal claim to any money they might earn. To this day, women's right in the U.S. Constitution isn't explicitly guaranteed. About 48 years ago, Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment, but this was never ratified. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, does have the Equal Protection Clause, but women's rights still remain unguaranteed to this day. Professor Rollinger of Florida State University suggested that the reason the Equal Rights Amendment hasn't been ratified by all states include fears of the disruption of the traditional gender roles, including child rearing. Additionally, Professor Rollinger believes that women will lose their exemption from draft. Theodosia Enshala of Women's Legal Aid Center in Tanzania mentioned that both sexes have equal rights to land ownership, in large part owing to the Village Land Act in 1999. Customary laws, on the other hand, still prevent women and girls from inheriting land from their spouses and parents. Social hindrances. Gender inequality arises at its most embryonic form when women do not have total control over when they are ready to be parents. Globally, 40% of pregnancies were unintended. 50% of these unintended pregnancies ended in abortions, 12% in miscarriages and 38% in unplanned births. Women with unintended pregnancies often have to stop working or studying and become economically dependent rather than independent. Research from the Harvard Department of Global Health predicts that 80,000 women will leave the workforce in 2020 alone due to unintended pregnancies. As a consequence, for every woman forced to leave the workforce due to unintended pregnancy, our human capital index drops. It has been clearly documented that women's access to employment, business opportunities, financial resources and economic empowerment is linked to improvements in reproductive health. Increase in use of contraceptives and access to high-quality sexual and reproductive health services, longer birth intervals and planned pregnancies allow higher labor force participation by women, improve the economic status of families and create a robust workforce driving the economy. Studies have also shown that women are inherently disadvantaged by cultural and psychological factors. Female entrepreneurs often lack access to capital, which encumbers business growth. Women have proven to be risk-averse and a leadership gap exists between men and women, especially in the African context. Irusalam Sibber of Africa Growth Initiative suggested the use of different capital-based, training-based, and gender-based interventions will likely help close the gap. Some of these interventions include lessons on creation of business plans, networking, establishment of virtual stores, and access to new markets components. World War I. Prior to World War I, most work was done by men and women remained primarily responsible to taking care of the children and the home. When the war began and most men went to fight, and a gap was created in the workspace. Soon the production of munition almost came to a halt while the need increased. It didn't take long for the need to employ women in these factories became inevitable. By 1917, munition factories, which at the time had primarily women employees and were producing 80% of the weapons and shells used by the British Army. As a matter of fact, women risked their lives by exposing themselves to trinitrotoluene used in making explosives. This exposure led to the demise of about 400 women during World War I. By the end of this war, the women employment rate had risen from around 23% to about 46%. In some pockets we still see the gap wider than ever. In Africa, women form the majority in the informal sector, but we see 1 woman out of every 3 people in the formal sector. International Finance Corporation also reports that women ownership of small and medium-sized enterprises (SMEs) account for only 33%. This is critical because SMEs are the engine of growth. American Express published the 2017 State of Women-Owned Business Report, showing that women-owned businesses employ about 9 million people in the U.S. and generate $1.7 trillion in revenues. Some have argued that increasing the women participation in the workforce will increase demand of labor, which will in turn lower the wages. But looking back to my days in Mr. Benjamin Kiminywandi's economics class on the demand for labor, it suggested that if women join the workforce due to increase in opportunities, then wages actually increase. This is due to the shift in the labor participation will be caused by increased in demand. Furthermore, increased in women's participation in the labor force might lead to replacement of less productive men, thus increased productivity. Professor Amanda Weinstein noted that as women surpassed men in obtaining college degrees in 1982, they likely raised overall skill levels and also introduced complementary skills. Economically empowering women is not a zero-sum game. In 2015, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked about his decision to have a cabinet that was 50% female. He responded succinctly by saying, "Because it's 2015, unlike a few decades ago." Forbes' 2019 edition of the Most Powerful Women in Politics highlighted the fact that the mentioned women oversee $54 trillion in GDP and more than 3.5 billion people. Additionally, a report by Jonathan Wotzel et al. Suggests that if women's participation in the economy is equal to that of men, we can potentially add $28 trillion to the global GDP by the year 2025. In recognizing this, Norway's board membership rule requires women to make up 40% of the publicly listed boards. Short of this, companies risk dissolution. The Economist reported that in the 5 years following this rule, more than a dozen countries set similar quotas. In countries like Belgium, France and Italy, penalties also include dissolution or even banning from remunerating directors altogether. Ahuna Ezeakonwa of the United Nations Development Programme revealed that since 2010, sub-Saharan African economies lose $95 billion a year because of the gender gap. S&P Global mentioned that, if U.S. companies hired and promoted women at the same rate as countries like Norway, the economy can grow by 8%. S&P Global's analysis also shows that Germany's GDP would be 11% bigger while those of France and Japan would be 16% and 14% bigger respectively. Closing the gap for good. To truly empower women, policymakers need to address a couple of major constraints among others. First off, we need to migrate away from the cultural beliefs about gender and power. Secondly, we need to overturn the aspiration barriers that keep women in a constant subordinate state along with the aforementioned internalized constraints. Many women have overcome the general impediments and remain pivotal to the future of our societies and globe in general. As we celebrate women today, I want to shed some light on some of these remarkable women that have shaped the world of business, politics, science and technology. Marie Curie was a physicist and chemist whose radioactivity research laid the foundation for modern nuclear science, from X-rays to radiotherapy for treating cancer. She was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize, and the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes in different sciences. Wangari Maathai was a Kenyan scholar and environmental activist. She founded the pioneering Green Belt movement in 1977, which encourages people, particularly women, to plant trees to combat environmental degradation. Her holistic approach eventually led her to link environmental responsibility to political struggles of governance, human rights and peace. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. Katherine Johnson, who passed away this past February, also known as Katherine Goebel, was an American mathematician whose calculations of orbital mechanics as a NASA employee were critical to the success of the first and subsequent U.S. crewed spaceflights. During her 35-year career at NASA and its predecessor, she earned a reputation for mastering complex manual calculations and helped pioneer the use of computers to perform the tasks. Bibi Titi Muhammad was one of the leaders of the Tanzanian nationalist movement. Born into a Muslim, merchant family, she entered politics in 1955, becoming the first female member of the Tanganyika African National Union (TANU), an independent party led by Julius Nyerere. As a singer and a musician in the community dancing groups Ingoma of Dar es Salaam, she helped to recruit more than 6,000 women for the TANU. Margaret Thatcher changed the face of modern British politics. She started her political career at Oxford University, where she was president of the Conservative Association. In 1959, she won the parliamentary seat in Finchley and became Margaret Thatcher MP. But she really made history in 1975 when she became leader of the Conservative Party, one of the 2 major political parties in the UK, and later, in 1979, the first female British Prime Minister. She had some pretty radical views and even earned herself the nickname the Iron Lady. Rosa Parks. In 1955, Rosa Parks, an African-American living in Montgomery, Alabama, challenged the race segregation that existed in parts of the U.S. by refusing to give off her seat on a bus so that a white person could sit down. Her protest was supported by many other African Americans and sparked the civil rights movement which, in the 1960s, eventually won equal rights. 4 years after her death in 2005, Barack Obama became the first African American U.S. president. Coco Chanel opened her first shop in the early 1900s, starting off by designing hats. She soon turned her attention to clothes too and, by the 1920s, launched her first perfume. Ever heard of the saying "the little black dress," also known as the LBD? Yep, you have Coco Chanel to thank for that. Almost 100 years after it was first created, Chanel No. 5 is still probably the world's most famous perfume. Huda Sha'rawi was a pioneer Egyptian feminist leader and nationalist. She helped to organize Mubarak Muhammad Ali, a women's social service organization, in 1909, and the Intellectual Association of Egyptian Women in 1914. Her feminist activism was complemented by her involvement in Egypt's nationalist struggle. She established the Egyptian Feminist Union in 1923, was founding president of the Arab Feminist Union, and spoke widely on women's issues and concerns throughout the Arab world and Europe. Dr. Hayat Sindi, scientist and first female Saudi Assembly member. Apart from being the first Saudi Arabian woman to get accepted by Cambridge University for a PhD in biotechnology, Dr. Hayat is also amongst the first women to be a part of the Consultative Assembly of Saudi Arabia, has made major contributions to the medical field and has been ranked the 19th most influential Arab in the world by Arabian Business. Angela Merkel became the first female Chancellor of Germany in 2005 and is serving her 4th term. Merkel remains the de facto leader of Europe, leading the region's largest economy after steering Germany through financial crisis and back to growth. Her leadership is marked by her steely reserve, from standing up to Donald Trump to allowing more than 1 million Syrian refugees into Germany. She has a PhD in quantum chemistry and is fluent in Russian. Elite troops of women soldiers contributed to the military power of the Kingdom of Dahomey in the 18th and 19th centuries. Admired in their country and feared by their adversaries, these formidable warriors never fled from danger. The troops were dissolved following the fall of Geberhansen, the last king of Dahomey, during French colonial expansion at the end of the 19th century. Today, 56% of college students are women. For the first time, last year women aged 25 and older now account for more than half of the college-educated workforce, 50.2%. Yes, we have made gigantic strides in some contexts and countries, but globally we have a long way to go. It's time to re-examine our policies, our long-held cultural norms, and to reconsider the role of a girl in the society. We now have enough evidence that this shift in mindset isn't just good for the families but good for entire globe. Barriers to success for girls need to be removed so they too can realize their fullest potential. I would like my unborn daughter to be judged by the content of her character, by her competence and innate capabilities, and never at any point by her gender. I want to conclude by quoting the 22-year-old Pakistani Nobel Prize laureate, Malala Yousafzai, "I raise up my voice, not so that I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard." Ellipsis. We cannot all succeed when half of us are held back.